This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome, everybody, to Boston 9/11 Truth. Today is Thursday, February 20th, and we have a very special guest speaker tonight. But before we go there, we're just going to cover a little housekeeping. Remember to keep your mics muted. Presenter will go for about an hour, and then we'll have Q&A. We all have strong ideas, but we expect people to be respectful during Q&A and in the chat. We will be strict about enforcing respectful communication. You will be muted or removed from the meeting if you are disrespectful. Please stay muted until you are called at the Q&A portion of tonight's forum. Please remember to like and share our events and subscribe to our YouTube and Rumble channel and check out our website. We'd love to hear from you, so please be sure to leave us a comment. So, little disclaimer. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are the speaker's own and do not necessarily represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Boston 9/11 Truth. The material and information presented here is for general information and educational purposes only. The Boston 9/11 Truth name and all forms and abbreviations of the property are the property of its owners, and use does not imply endorsement or opposition to any specific organization, product, or service. But before we get underway, we want our guests and our audience to know that Boston 9/11's Truth mission is specifically about promoting the quest for what really happened on 9/11. There is strength in numbers. There is strength in numbers. When we bring the greatest minds together, we can come up with solutions and goals that can make all of our combined efforts effective and powerful. In order to provide the technical and media support required, we need your help in building a team that demonstrates respectful dialogue and consists of creative thinkers, writers, forum hosts, marketing, technical directors, video clip creators, anything you can lend to help us out. That would be great. If you think you're a good fit for Boston 9/11 Truth, we can help you find your niche here. So contact 911truthboston@gmail.com if you'd like to join our team. With your help and outreach, we can achieve our mission. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. He is, as you saw in the email, he's Joseph Olson. He's been a self-employed professional engineer since 1983 and worked in hundreds of multi-story buildings in 20 different states. He knew when the South Tower collapsed in 14 seconds that was controlled demolition. He has invested thousands of hours of research explained in Unequivocal 9/11 Nukes. That's the name of the article at Veterans Today. In 1989, Joseph Olson presented a tour de force of city planning to Houston City Council and Metro opposing their 14-mile Disney monorail. He met with fired Chairman Bob Lanier, who told him this illegal no-bid million-dollar project included $200 million in kickbacks to Texas power brokers. Then he ended up in a corrupt divorce court where Joseph met Pete Bruton, selling Bruton's the Mafia, CIA, and George Bush. That's Bruton's book on the $600 billion savings and loan heist. Joseph worked on dozens of these frauds. He has been co-host on Coast to Coast AM 5 times and he was a guest on Coast to Coast and co-host on TNT Radio for 2 years. He's the author of Slaying Fake Science and co-founder of Principia Scientific and International. Welcome, Joseph.
Hello, Boston, and hello, America. Yeah, this is 25 years in the making. It's absolutely ridiculous. A lot of people have their red pill moments. Some of them happened at 911. Some happened after 911. Some of them happened during the Wu flu pandemic. But for me, mine happened a lot earlier than that. And that's documented in a little bit more detail at my website, Slaying Fake Science, under videos. I've got an hour-long video. But my most compelling moment was when I went down and presented a functional rail system to the city of Houston. And I won't go into any additional detail because we've got so much material to cover today. But I ended up in divorce court. And while I was in divorce court, I walked into courthouse one day, and there was a guy that had been a reporter at the Houston Post named Pete Bruton. And he had done an investigative series on the $600 billion S&L crisis. And the S&L crisis was totally engineered by the Bush gang. And I had worked on 50 of the projects that are in the bibliography at the back of this book. And so I knew that Pete had done his homework because he'd mentioned the dozen players that were involved in that I knew. And it ended up that we never financed the theft that happened in those savings and loans. Over 1,100 savings and loans went bankrupt. And what the government did was that the savings and loan secured data was, let's see, I've got it written down here. Okay, the savings and loan insurance was originally the FSLIC. And then in 1985, they had a crisis. And so they abolished it by 1989, but they created in the meantime an FIRREA, which is the Financial Institute Reform, Recovery, and Enforcement Act. And that just kind of acted as a place where they could hold this $600 billion in debt, unsecured debt, until they were able to incorporate it into what was called the Resolution Trust Corporation. And I knew people that were involved in getting money directly from the Resolution Trust Corporation, including Mayor Lanier, who had been the director of City of Houston's metro system under the illegal rail contract. And I had a meeting with him, and he said, yeah, he said one of the local contractors said they didn't have to bid against him, but they got had $200 million of excess profit in that billion-dollar rail project. And that's what ended me up in divorce court, and that's where I ended up meeting Pete Bruton, and that's where I ended up realizing how vast the network of extortion is by the part of the power elite in the United States, and they call themselves the power elite in Houston. And I had meetings with 7 U.S. congressmen for over an hour apiece, 4 city of Houston mayors, every member of city council. I was on every TV station in town. And so this is back in 1990. And so I've been extremely well aware of how defective the system is, but then there wasn't much I could do about it at that point. And then when 911 happened, I almost never watched TV because I knew it was always propaganda. And so I listened to talk radio, but at talk radio, they only give you the weather at the top and bottom of the hour. And if you happen to be busy doing something and you miss it, then you got to wait another 30 minutes. But on the morning TV shows, they have a cry line across the bottom of the screen with the weather, so you can watch the weather and just kind of pretend like you're watching TV until you get what you need and you can turn it off. So I'm watching TV on September 11th, and they said a plane has hit the North Tower. And I went, oh my God. It's like, and it had a small hole in the side of the building. I thought, well, that's pretty bad piloting to hit a clear day, to hit a 110-story tall building, 1,300 feet tall. So it could possibly be sabotage. And there have been other instances of things like that happening where people flew planes into buildings. So anyhow, I was watching it, and then a plane, I called a couple of friends of mine, was telling them, and then they said a plane hit the South Tower. Well, an hour later, the South Tower leaned over 22 degrees from plumb. The top of it was canted over, and I wasn't familiar with how the building had been constructed, even though I've worked in hundreds of multi-story buildings in my 40-something year career. I wasn't eminently familiar with how the World Trade Center buildings were built, and so I didn't understand. I thought what was going to happen is that it would collapse the columns on the lean side and shear by tension the ones on the other side, and the top 20 floors of the building would flop over, hit the side, and slide down. And that's what my training as a structural engineer would have had me believe. But turns out that the building brought itself upright and then started falling down, and it fell in 14 seconds in its own shadow. And I said at that moment, which was 11 o'clock Central Time on 911, that this was controlled demolition, but I didn't know how they did it. So, but I was determined that I was going to try to find out how they did it, because as an engineer, I'd also worked as a forensic engineer as a summer intern. And so I had a good idea of how to do good analysis. And like I said, a trained structural engineer. So I started studying it, and turns out this was a 100% orchestrated event. We have a couple of events that happened prior to that indicate pre-planning. And those are, first of all, we had a John Hopkins and Rockefeller Foundation tabletop in June of 2001 called Lockstep. And this is going to be about a future pandemic. And that was pretty interesting for what happened later, which happened in 2020. But then there was another presentation by NASA in July of 2001 called Future Wars 2025. And it said that in order to have continuation of government, the public needed to have trauma-based mind control. Okay. Well, about this same time, a woman who was a contractor with the CIA was getting a whole bunch of chatter that was indicating that there was going to be a plane attack on the Twin Towers, which coincidentally, Phoebe had written 5 books about terrorism in the Twin Towers. And also, the FBI had tried to arrange a bombing of the North Tower on February 26, 1993, and they had tried to frame a guy named Imad Salem, S-A-L-E-M, and he was supposed to be the patsy that was going to drive the FBI-provided Ryder van with the FBI-provided explosives, which were going to be fake explosives, with an FBI-provided detonator. But he decided at the last minute he wasn't going to drive it. He arranged for somebody else to drive it. And so the FBI said, well, okay, we still caught you. And he said, yeah, but I got audio tapes of you setting me up for this. So this was something that was absolutely staged by the FBI in 1993 to blow up the Twin Towers. And as Beebe mentions in 5 of his different books that you can go check out online, the United States needs to attack terrorism worldwide in order to prevent the
We lost your audio. We can't, somehow you got muted. You need to unmute yourself. Something happened.
Here we go. I got it. Yeah. Okay. Here we go.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So bottom line is you can look that up yourself. Just look up Imad Samuel, and it's the North Tower, February 26, 1993. And CBS did a big interview with the guy, and he said and they ended up using him as a witness so they could convict Razi Youssef. And so that's a little bit of a tell right there. But then you had another incident that happened, and this was 4 FBI offices had been notified by flight schools, one in Phoenix, one in California, I think in San Diego, one in Oklahoma City, and one in Florida. I think, and the one in Florida, I think, was Huffman Aviation. But bottom line is, they had multiple FBI offices report Arab flight school anomalies, and they did nothing about it. Well, the guy that was taking flight school in Oklahoma City was a guy named Zakaris Masari, and he ended up having 56 hours of dual time, but no instructor would sign him off to solo a Cessna 150. And so he left Oklahoma City and he went up to Minneapolis, and he went to a place called Pan American Flight School. No relationship to the failed airlines, but he went there, and he wanted to get training in a simulator for 747s. And they said, okay, well, show us your flight book. And so he handed them their book, and he says, well, you've never soloed a 150. How are you going to fly a 747? He goes, well, it doesn't matter. And they said, well, we can't qualify you for student loans, because he was here on an expired student visa from Saudi Arabia. And so we can't qualify you for those student loans unless you actually have the capability of doing this. And he goes, well, still want to take lessons. They said, well, it's $200 an hour. And he pulled out $5,000 in $100 bills and said, okay, well, I want to buy 20 hours or whatever. And so they notified the FBI office, and this is Colleen Rowley and Harry Samet were the 2 FBI agents that investigated him, arrested him, and then this was on August 16th, 2001. And then their district chief said that they could not prosecute him and they could not open his laptop. And so Harry Samet wrote a 26-page affidavit and sent it to 50 different offices in the headquarters in Washington, D.C. at FBI. And they sent him back one message, and it says, is he in the bathroom? No, he's not. This will be a fun little chat. And so anyhow, you can see interviews where Colleen Rowley explains exactly what happened. But he sent a 26-page affidavit, and the FBI said that you're not allowed to investigate him and do not open his laptop. So that's a little bit that happened in the way of pre-planning to indicate that this was not just a few random box cutters and some jet planes that brought down multiple buildings that day. So getting back to what happened on that particular day, like I said, I'd been studying, and I read 4th Generation Nuclear Weapons by Andre Gosper, which was published in February 2008. I read Ground Zero by William Cahill, which was published in 2006. I read the field manual for the Army nuclear weapons deployment, which was declassified in 1986 to get an understanding of military nuclear weapons. And then in May of 2009, Architects and Engineers for 911 Truth had a DVD premiere in Austin with Alex Jones. It was a 4-hour-long session. I got there early. They had exhibits, including the signed, stamped, approved drawings by the New York building officials for the structural plans in the building. And since I was trained as a structural engineer and had to coordinate mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems inside various types of structures, I was very familiar with structural plans and very familiar with how they were built. And so it's like, okay, so I started looking into the plans. I got there an hour early, and then they did their 2-hour-long DVD presentation. There was about an hour-long presentation by Richard Gage and another hour-long by Alex Jones. And so I said, well, his hypothesis is that it's controlled demolition, but I don't believe thermite could have done that. And I don't believe you could do it with conventional explosives. It just requires too much energy and too much simultaneous action on the part of your detonation charges. So I started doing some more research, and then as coincidence would have it, in 2014, I also had attended 2 presentations that Architects and Engineers for 911 Truth had here in Houston with Richard Gage in attendance. And then, and both of those, they had their DVDs. And in one of them, I picked up a pamphlet that says Beyond Misinformation. And in this misinformation booklet, it mentions that it takes 0.13 pounds of thermite to melt 1 pound of steel. Well, considering how many pounds of steel were melted, you do the math. If you melt 100,000 tons of steel and it takes 0.13, that's 13,000 pounds of, and that's actually tons. And so bottom line is the amount of thermite necessary to, and I have to just blank out that there's comments because I'm trying to answer the comments and do extemporaneous talking at the same time. So bottom line is there was no way that thermite could have done that. And I'll get a little bit more into the details of thermite here in just a second. But I didn't make any public statements about it, even though, like I said, I had those meetings with Richard Gage and with the Architects for Engineers, and David Barnett was the one here in Houston that was in charge of that. He was an architect. And here's some information that came up a little bit later. Like I said, I didn't make a public statement until I was contacted, till I read 2 dozen articles on nuclear education at Veterans Today. And they went through some of the same material that I'd already researched and helped me understand exactly how nuclear weapons work and exactly what could have possibly happened to those buildings. And so I made my first public statements with a 2-hour-long interview with James Fetzer on March 16th of 2015. And then I didn't make any additional public statements for a little while. And then Fetzer started getting some other people that we ended up doing discussions with. And we ended up doing about a dozen interviews on YouTube involving 911 and ended up getting all of his YouTube material removed. But one of the people that I was in contact with is a guy named Mark Hightower, who has a master's degree in chemical engineering, and he did an analysis on the detonation velocity of thermite. And the way you destroy things with explosives is by exceeding the detonation velocity, which is the speed of sound inside the material. So for steel, that's 6,100 meters per second. So if you can put a sound force of 6,100 meters per second into steel, you can fragment the steel, and you do that by an explosive. And for concrete, it's 3,200 meters per second. Well, thermite, the highest measured reaction for thermite is 895 meters per second. Now, steel melts at 2,750 degrees. Steel is vaporized at 5,180 degrees Fahrenheit. And thermite melts, it burns at 4,000 degrees, but it requires a 3,000-degree magnesium fuse to light it, and those things are kind of finicky. So you can't count on having thermite being 100% effective just because of the fuse requirements for it. So that's item number one. Item number two is concrete melts at 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. And so you couldn't have vaporized the steel with thermite, and you could barely melt it with thermite. And the other thing that's kind of curious about it is the Twin Towers were built with square box beam sections, and I'll show you those details here in just a second. But the exterior was covered with 2,200 tons of aluminum. And if you're vaporizing steel and you're vaporizing aluminum at the same time, then you've got aluminum and steel molecules in the air, and they will actually form Fe 2O3 Al2, which is iron oxide aluminum. And so, and they will naturally form nanothermite. And Richard Gage, like I said, I've met him again in Austin in 2023 for a 3-hour conference at an event there. And then we also interviewed him for 90 minutes when I was a host on TNT Radio. So I've had lots of contact with him. I have emails with him all the time. But he's just insistent that it had to be thermite. But here's the thing, Richard. You never had a physics class, you never had a chemistry class, and you never had a structural engineering class. And I don't know why you can keep arguing with me about this. I'll be happy to debate it with you, but you won't debate. So that's a little bit of an issue right there. And so anyhow, I ended up going to a conference in Austin called Austin Truth Fest. And this was on September 11th, 2016, on the 15th anniversary. And at that conference, there was investigative reporter Jim Mars, who did excellent research on the JFK assassination. And he also had done lots of research on false flags. And then another presenter at that particular meeting was Christopher Bolin, who wrote Solving 911. And I've got a copy of his book, and he explains exactly all the financial involvement that was in the World Trade Center building, including the Cantor Fitzgerald Group, which 400 brokers were killed that day in the North Tower. And so that was a little bit interesting. And then one of the other sources I got in touch with was, and where is it? Mind like a steel trap, and things are completely organized the way I don't want them. Okay. I got a copy of the World Trade Center buildings. This is the FEMA report. It's FEMA Chapter 2, and FEMA 403 Chapter 2. And I thought I had the cover sheet to this. Oh, here we go. Now, this is, again, FEMA 403 underlined Chapter 2, and it's about a 20-page document that includes the information on the actual construction of the building, which I've verified from the plans was exactly correct. And so this is the exterior of the building. This is what's called a Vanderreel truss. And a Vanderreel truss has horizontal segments instead of the traditional triangular sections that you would consider with a truss. The horizontal segments are what's called spandrel sections. Those are every floor. That's 52-inch high, 2-inch thick plate steel. Okay. Then in between those, at 40 inches on center, you have 16 by 16 box columns, which are made out of steel that's welded together, and that's varies in thickness. It's a 16 by 16 continuous on the outside, but the thickness varies depending on the load as you go down through the height of the building. And the load varies with the wind load, because the buildings were designed to take 120 mile an hour wind load, and they had 5 hurricanes prior to the collapse of the buildings. And this is, again, from the FEMA document. This shows the wind loading on the exterior of the building. And the buildings were 200 feet on a side and 1,300 feet tall, and it had 5 acres of area on the side. And it was square footprints, so that's what gave you the 5 acres for the 120 mile an hour wind load, which they had 5 hurricanes and didn't break a window. So the building was really strong, so that wasn't an issue at all. Then the next thing is, I was contacted by a guy named Robert David Steele, and he said, I want to, when Trump was running for office in 2016, he said that he was going to declassify the JFK and the 911 information. And he said, I've got a collection of authors that I want to put together, and we're going to write a memo to the president. And I have 2 people that are inside the cabinet to get this to Trump. But here's the deal. Trump will not read more than 800 words. So you have to be just 2 pages, and you have to include a picture. So I said, okay, Mr. Trump. And this is Robert David Steele. Let's see. Here it is. Memo to the President, Robert David Steele. And if you've got a website where I can put links to this, I think they're in my articles. But bottom line is, I've had either met in person or had discussions with most of the people involved in this. Kevin Barrett is with Veterans Today, and he interviewed me. Scott Bennett used to be with Veterans Today. He passed away recently. Christopher Boleyn, which I mentioned. Steve Dick, which is one of the guys that I interviewed with Fetzer. Gordon Duff is the editor of Veterans Today, and he's the one that posted my articles there. James Fetzer, I've done hundreds of interviews with. Anyhow, Mark Hightower. Won't go through the rest of them, but bottom line is my article was Twin Towers destroyed using clean nukes. And if you look at the picture of this tower as it's being burned, you see a pyroclastic flow coming out of the top of the building, and then you see the flow cascading over both of the sides of the building. So we'll get to a little bit more detail on that in just a second. So this was in 2018. I went to the MAGA rally here in Houston at the Toyota Center in 2018, and I took laminated copies of the Robert David Steele articles with me and talked to people standing in line because you had to get there early. They issued 80,000 tickets for an 18,000 seat arena. And I had very little pushback. Most people said, well, everything you're saying makes more sense than the 9/11 Commission. And then the next year, I was getting ready to be a guest on Coast to Coast AM again, and they had actually interviewed Judy Woods with her directed energy hypothesis, and they'd interviewed Richard Gage, but only like one time each because they didn't want to get too deep into that rabbit hole. And I was getting ready to be on again, and so on July 30th, 2019, I wrote an article called Unequivocal 911 Nukes. And it goes through a lot of this material. This is posted at Veterans Today. It goes through a lot of the material that I'm discussing today. And that way you don't have to try to take notes while we're talking. You can pull up this particular articles. I was contacted by one of the readers at Veterans Today. He said, you need to read the Palmer Report. So I pulled up the Palmer Report. This is a 5,000 word article. It includes 45 PowerPoint slides showing exactly what's going on, and it has 3 90-minute videos. Now, this is a thermographic image of the front of it. You see the 3 red arrows in 2 different locations? Those are the Twin Towers. Those were 1,350 feet tall. They both collapsed in 14 seconds. And as you can see, there's no visible debris field there. Okay, the other one is, this is building 7, which is 47 stories tall and collapsed in 7 seconds. And again, a very limited amount of material considering the amount of material it took to build these buildings. And then this is, nobody mentions it, this is building 6, which looks like a rectangular volcano because they planted a nuclear bomb in the basement of that and vaporized the core out of that building too. Now, one of the things that they mention in the Palmer Report, getting back to the construction of the building, the Hudson River is 15 feet below grade level in Manhattan. And Manhattan, in that particular location, is built on 40 feet of glacial till. When the ice cap was across New York City, it was 1,000 feet deep. And when it melted, it dropped rubble and silt and dirt down on top of the granite bedrock. And when they got ready to build the Twin Towers, they realized that they couldn't drill and blast into the granite bedrock without fracturing the 100-foot wall that was between the Hudson River and the granite bedrock, which was 40 feet below grade. So they built a slurry bathtub all the way around the perimeter of where the parking garage was going to be, and then they excavated it and they built the building foundation on top of the granite bedrock. So no portion of the building went below 40 feet below grade. And when the towers started to burn because of the nuclear weapon, what they did is And if you look at the floor plan, building the only continuous elevator from the 5th floor basement all the way up to the 110th floor was elevator number 50, which just happened to be in the center of the building. And so they planted charges in the transfer elevator passages to blast those out. And those were the explosions that happened prior to the impact of the plane, which everybody knows happened. And then they planted the nuclear device, which is probably a 1 to 2 kiloton device, on the granite bedrock in the basement of elevator number 50. And the granite bedrock worked as a lens and a tamper. And what it did is it forced the energy up through the core of the building. And there again, it would have contained the flash. It would have contained the shock wave, which caused the fragmentation of the steel columns and fracturing of the concrete floors in the core of the building. And as the core of the building was falling down, the heat would vaporize it and pour it out of the top of the building. Well, they just accidentally mentioned that carbon, if you hit it with a helium atom, it causes fission. Well, also, if you have a nuclear reaction and you're using gamma, alpha, and beta rays to bombard elements, you can cause isotopes. And the isotopes that you get from steel and concrete, and where do I have that written down? Oh, man. It's in my article, and I don't know if I brought the right booklet that has that particular material in it. Oh, here we go. Yeah, iron has 4 stable isotopes and 24 radioactive isotopes. Carbon, which is one of the other things elements that it takes to make carbon steel, has 2 stable, 13 radioactive. Calcium, which is one of the things that you use to make concrete, has 5 stable, 21 radioactive, and silicon, which is another ingredient in concrete, has 3 stable and 20 radioactive. Gypsum, which is in the sheetrock that's inside the building, has calcium and sulfur oxide, and sulfur has 4 stable and 19 radioactive. Granite has, which is in the bedrock, has 1 stable, 18 radioactive, and it contains phosphorus, which has 1 stable and 24 radioactive. So bottom line is, you have over 150 available isotopes when you're subjecting a building to gamma rays, which are the highest electromagnetic photons, beta rays, which are electrons or positron nuclides that move at 167,000 miles per second, which is about 90% of the speed of light, or alphas, which is a helium atom, which is 2 protons and 2 neutrons, which is an H4, which moves at 7% of the speed of light. And what happens when you hit a large molecule, you can either add a neutron and create an isotope of that one, or you can knock out a neutron and make other isotopes. And so bottom line is, you have this whole array of nuclear material that's going off inside the building, but it's absorbing the radiation that's coming directly from the bomb. So you don't get that particular element showing up that much in the dust, although there are strontium and barium and other things that wouldn't be in the natural building. And you had radiation in the background around the tower. And this was also covered in other articles that were written at Veterans Today. Now, they did a pretty good job with their analysis, but there was one thing that they didn't understand. Let's see if I can find, and that was the nuclear isotopes. And I detail all this in an article that was printed at Veterans Today called Exposing the NIST Jenga Game, because these guys, with the Palmer report was written by 4 PhD physicists in Europe, and they didn't understand building codes, and they also did not understand isotopes and nuclear radiation as well as they pretended. And then here again, this is from the FEMA 403. shows you the bar joists that were connected top and bottom. They were also welded to the spandrel sections at every bar joist, and then they had spurs that connected to that, called a hairpin, that connected through the top of the bar joist and was welded. And then they had a 6-inch poured concrete slab on every floor. So these buildings were really robust. Curiously enough, the panels were built in segments, and this again is from FEMA 403. The color indicates the 3-story tall panels that were built at shipyards across the Hudson River, brought over and swung in with cranes. And if you look at this, you notice that there's 2 complete panels that have no reason why they would fail at those particular points. The box columns were bolted, in-bolted, and then, like I said, they were splice bolted between the spandrels, the horizontal spandrel sections, and they were also connected to the floor joists. So there's no way that you could have these 2 particular holes pop out unless you had gone in. And there was a group operating in the building for 90 days prior to the explosion called the Gelatin Group. And this was art students from a foreign country, which we shall not name, that were inside the building. And they were probably the ones that cut the particular joist material out and cut the splices and then planted shape charges. And Steve Dick had photos of one of these complete 3-story tall box sections that was laying next to the church beside the World Trade Center buildings, where you can see the concave of that. I may disagree. Well, that's great. Okay. We'll disagree in the comment section afterwards. And I may end up having to turn off my video and switch over to power source, because using video with the limited iPhone battery, and particularly since I'm trying to use the earphones, is a little bit prohibitive. But bottom line is, this article explains that. And then if you look at this photo, this again is from FEMA 403, you'll notice there's a sideways swipe which goes in this particular direction. And what it appears to me and everybody else that studied this is that you exceed the max velocity at 1,000-foot elevation on the 767s. At 1,000 feet, you can't go the velocities that were recorded by radar. And it looks like what they did is that they used a homing device and then hit the building with a missile. They needed something to have a soundtrack. And so this was probably a drone that was flown in. Dr. Judy Wood. Okay, well, that's great. I talked to her on the phone. I've spent 40 hours reviewing her website and seeing her various interviews with Alex Jones and everybody else. And I disagree with her. It was a directed energy weapon, but it wasn't remote. It was placed in the basement of the building. And that's exactly what these nuclear weapons were. It was a nuclear bunker buster bomb, which shoots plasma up through the core of the building. I soloed in 1976 with 7 hours of flight time, and I had total 40 hours in my logbook when the plane that I was flying was crashed by another student, and I couldn't afford to continue flying lessons. But bottom line is, I've got probably 150, 200 hours in general aviation on a dozen different airframes with friends that have airplanes, and several of them have been flight instructors. So I'm very familiar with flying, and there's no way that those planes hit. I also followed Field McConnell, who was a Northwest Airlines pilot and a former Marine fighter jet and a Air National Guard fighter jet pilot. And he said that the planes were landed at an Air Force base, and that drones were taken and hit the buildings as well as the Pentagon. So I don't want to get any deeper into the Shanksville and the Pentagon, because those are not areas of my expertise, and I don't want to get any further other than on Building 7. I watched the every one of the presentations by Halsey, Leroy Halsey, which he was a structural professor at Fairbanks University, and they did finite and element analysis on the FEMA excuse for the World Trade Center 7 building, and they proved that it was impossible to have happen. But they did not go the next step and say what did happen. And so there again, it appears to me that it was similar to what happened to the other buildings, is that they used nuclear weapons on all of these buildings. So anyhow, with that, I took these copies of the all of my series, which included the Palmer Report, to the MAGA rally in Dallas in November of 2019, and they locked the gates at about 8 o'clock. I got there at 7 a.m. and there was already 500 people in line. They locked the gates to have people not crash it. And so there was a captive audience of about 500 people that they didn't let into the American Airlines arena until 4 o'clock that afternoon. And so I had plenty of time to go around with my laminated copies and all 3 of my articles and explain to these people what was going on. And I'd have groups of 20 people at a time, and they'd be sitting there going, oh my God, this makes sense. And then there was probably some people that were retired military or who knows, Dallas freaks. But anyhow, I had, that was the only place where I had any real opposition to what I was proposing. And, you know, I'm more than willing to defend everything that I've said about all of this stuff, because it's all evidence-based and it's all based on sound engineering analysis of the materials. And there again, you can review my articles. I've got several other videotapes. Like I said, the one with Robert David Steele is on BitChute, and then also several with James Fetzer on BitChute, where we go through this same material. But I think I've done a pretty good presentation on what I feel is the most unequivocal evidence that nuclear bombs were planted in the building, and the reasons why it couldn't have been thermite. There again, if you have aluminum and iron that are vaporized and they're in the air, they're going to naturally form thermite, and it'll naturally be nanothermite. And any thermite that you find in the dust was not part of the demolition of the building, because thermite is not a catalyst. It is a reactant. And when you use thermite to melt steel, you don't get thermite as a byproduct. It eliminates the aluminum. So bottom line is there's no way that you could have the volume of thermite necessary to do the damage to the building. There's no way you could wire those in buildings that were 50% occupied without people noticing it. And there's no way you could have simultaneous control. There used to be a YouTube channel called Sparks that did a lot of videos by a group called Controlled Demolitions Inc. CDI, I think was the name of the group. And they showed demolitions and how they were able to set up and control these things. And it takes quite a bit of planning, and they have to go in and remove all of the critical moment connections and all of the shear connections and shear walls in order to be able to drop the buildings down the way they needed to drop them. And usually it's in a pretty dense environment. So in order to do this and have 3 buildings go off simultaneously without having any floors that didn't happen is pretty improbable. And so just from that standpoint, I'd be more than happy to present my material to a congressional committee, and I'd be more than happy to entertain a panel discussion with people that have alternative views, and I'm more than happy to take questions from anybody in the audience. So,
well, thank you. That was quite thorough. You've really done an amazing amount of research. So we're going to open it up to questions. Remember to keep your questions on topic and respectful. So as he said, he hasn't studied Shanksville or the Pentagon, so let's steer away from that. No reason to bring that up. So keep your questions on topic. And first up, we have Chris Bergier.
Yeah, can you hear me okay? I'm on another computer system here.
Yes.
Oh.
And see you.
Yeah. Okay, Joseph. So yeah, I'm also I'm a licensed professional engineer. I've been researching 9/11 for 13 years, trying to find the truth here. Let me just ask you two questions here. I'm going to do a screen share my screen. I'm gonna share this gentleman right here. His name is Pascal Buzelli. Okay, so he claims that he surfed down 22 flights of stairs as the tower was falling. Okay, and he didn't suffer any burns, and he lived to tell about it. And when he landed, he looked up and he just saw fresh blue sky. So I want you to explain to me how a nuclear device that has a lot of heat and kinetic energy can go off at the same time that he's falling down without him having any injuries. That's my first question. And then my second question here, let me go to stop screen sharing. My second one here, I'm going to share this one right here. But if you go to the 9/11 museum, you'll see a Holy Bible that was donated by a fireman who was recovering debris. And the Bible is fused to a piece of steel. Paper burns at 451 degrees and steel melts at 2,700 degrees. So explain to me how a fourth generation nuke can heat the piece of steel up without burning the Bible. So those are my two questions for you, and look forward to your response since you're a really great researcher.
Well, there's certainly anomalies in anything that are difficult to explain. And, whether there's evidence about him actually falling 22 floors and seeing blue sky above him is, open to question. One thing we do know is that there was 3,000 people in those buildings that they've not recovered bodies for, but what they have recovered is BB-sized pellets of human bodies on rooftops all around there, and they've been able to isolate the DNA of 1,500 of those people. But what happened to the other 1,500? And why aren't they recovering bodies? And why do the stainless steel doors on the elevators, there's no stainless steel doors? There was thousands of filing cabinets. There was no filing cabinets. There was porcelain toilet fixtures on every floor. There was no toilet fixtures. There was, if you start looking at the debris field, and that's another curious thing. Why did they sequester every one of the dump trucks and restrict anybody from going in there with filming equipment and not allow any forensic evidence to be collected prior to everything being shipped over to the Fresh Kills landfill and shipped over to China so that they could melt it?
I guess I just wanted to clarify your response. So you're saying that the destructive method had to do with heat, energy and kinetic energy is what was used to melt the towers. I just want to understand that that's your position. Heat and kinetic, a tremendous amount of heat and tremendous amount of kinetic energy, and then you're absolutely sure that there's not some other type of exotic technology that they use. You're absolutely sure that it's nuclear technology that was invented back in 1935.
Well, actually, it was a little later than that when they did White Sands, when they actually had the first controlled fission. But when you look at the exterior of the building, these particular panels.
I want to interrupt for just a second. There's some name calling going on in the chat. If it continues, you will be booted from this meeting. Okay, go right ahead. Sorry about that.
All right, Chris. If you look at this, what you have is a waveguide, and the gamma ray energy would be blocked by the steel, so it wouldn't be able to go out. And that's why you get these cutoff lines on the burns on the fire trucks and the vehicles that were nearby, which is what Judy implied was done with directed energy. But you would get the same thing if you had a plasma source that was inside the building that was shining out between the plate steel horizontal bands and the plate girder vertical bands. So that's one possible explanation there. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I just happen to disagree with you. I did meet, Robert David Still. He did mention Dr. Wood in his book, and we have, Paul Hellyer, former defense minister of Canada. He supports her. So I'm just wondering why that you're absolutely sure that directed energy weapons weren't used, and why you don't entertain that was non-thermal and non-kinetic, because you didn't have a bunch of debris going flying more than.
Well, everybody can. Yeah. Okay. I also met Robert David Steele when he was doing his unrigged tour, and he came through Texas, and they jiggled him around, and it was really difficult to finally catch him in location. But I did go to attend his event for 3 hours here in Texas. He was doing his tour before he was snuffed by the by the bio weapon that they created for us. Yep. And there again, I've done a lot of research on the Wu flu situation as well, and those articles are at Principia Scientific. Here's one of them. Wu flu bat study news for you. This is about hydroxychloroquine. And there again, this is at Principia Scientific. And also did an interesting interview with Coast to Coast on a book by Robert O. Becker, who's a orthopedic surgeon, on the effects of electromagnetic energy on organisms. And they were able to regenerate decortated spinal columns in lab rats in 1965 when the NIH decided that they didn't need to continue doing funding on that particular research. So some really interesting stuff. I've researched an enormous amount of things, but I also, like I said, spent 40 hours watching a dozen different Judy Woods interviews and reading every article she had posted on her website. And I had about a dozen questions for her, and I called her up, and she goes, have you bought my book? And I said, no, but I've got some questions. If you can answer them, I might be tempted to buy your book. She said, well, I'm not talking to anybody who hasn't bought my book. I said, well, you're not in the business of sharing truth. You're in the business of selling your books, and I'm not in the business of promoting somebody if I am pretty sure there's no way that they are correct. And first of all,
I mean, just in all fairness, I have read her book, and I think her book is excellent. So anyone that calls himself a 9/11 truth researcher and hasn't taken the time to research her book, I would just disagree that they're not putting the full effort into it, because her book has a lot of validity.
Well, I agree with her as far as the amount of energy that was required, and also agree with her the amount of weight of the buildings that was there. So, there's a lot of stuff that I agree with her. And she's a PhD mechanical engineer. She's a really sharp lady. But I don't agree that it was directed energy. And when we kept pressing her on it about where was the directed energy located, she came up with some abandoned army fort over in the Bronx. And if you look at the footprint, there's no way that you could get that over to the site where the buildings are. And the next thing is the reason why there is, and this is something, if you haven't reviewed this material, then you're not in a position to challenge me on this material. If you look at this, what happened is that using this as the lens for the nuclear reaction, they melted 100-foot deep hole into the granite bedrock that wasn't there when they built the foundation of the building. You can look at the photos of the building being built, and you can see the cranes working off of the granite foundation. And then you can go to the plates, and these have, like I said, they have 44 PowerPoint slides. Go to the slides 44 and 43, and they show giant 3-story track hose on top of this hole pulling pieces of steel up, and they show metamorphic faces of the granite where the nuclear blast burnt and melted the granite. And you can go over there with a Geiger counter to this day, and it's still emitting isotope radiation from that. And that's why they built reflecting ponds. You need to spend some serious time reading the Palmer Report. This is published at Veterans Today, called Breathtaking Solving Nuclear 911, the Palmer Report. And there again, 3 90-minute videos, 45 PowerPoint slides, 5,000-word articles. And when it was posted originally at Veterans Today, they had 80 articles on nuclear education, which documents the development of the nuclear weapons that were used and the pits that were taken out of the Pantex plant in Amarillo, Texas, and shipped out of Houston port, and where the pits were reprocessed into making this plasma bomb.
Okay, I just disagree. I believe that
well, that's good.
Were inside, and I believe they were from satellites. So we'll move on to the next
Thank
Yeah,
you,
question.
Chris.
Okay.
All right, next up we have Chuck Fall. Go ahead, Chuck.
Hey, okay, so I'll try to be brief, because I'm not an expert in anything. All I know is that everybody's speculating, and but I'm interested in what you're saying. It sounds like you're describing two mechanisms. One, that a bomb was planted in the basement, and that was something complementary applied, a gamma ray, you said, or did the bomb itself
No.
generate?
That's what happens when you have a nuclear bomb.
Okay.
So if you have just a fission bomb like the two that we used, the plutonium in Nagasaki and the uranium in Hiroshima, those are fission only. But then they realized that you could get a magnitude increase in power if you could make it into a fission fusion bomb. And that's what ended up being the hydrogen bomb. And it was difficult to get hydrogen to process it. You could get it using deuterium heavy water, but that takes an enormous amount of processing to centrifuge out the heavier isotope hydrogens, and in order to create that. So bottom line is they use lithium as the feedstock, and this is the Teller-Ulam law. And they use lithium, and when you break a 6-proton lithium atom with fission, then you end up with 4 heliums, and or 3 heliums, and the heliums are what is the alpha rays. And so these are, I'm sorry, but it's difficult to explain the complex nuclear stuff. Like I said, Veterans Today had 80 articles on it. And when I was reading those articles, I would have to spend an hour to an hour and a half a piece.
Okay, let me interrupt you.
Go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, we don't have to go down the deep rabbit hole on the technology that you're just, I get your drift. I see what you're saying. And you're giving an explanation for the dustification of all that concrete and all that metal on account of this powerful technology, which is a hybrid kind of technology. I posted into the chat an article I wrote speculating about this unique fire signature that shows up at these fire events, the melted cars. And I noticed that there were these, what Judy Wood calls the toasted cars. And that in that is a link to David Hughes, who speaks about the problem of omnivore by global plutocracy, and he defends Judy Wood and characterizes the technology as cold fusion is what, and again, this is above my pay scale to even remotely try to understand, but some of the anomalies are the paper that was scattered about that didn't burn up. Oddly enough, the heat factor wasn't such to burn up the paper because paper was left scattered about. Maybe you would have a thought on that. Why do you think Building 6 was hollowed out? What was the objective there? Do you have any speculation? So that's what I wanted to share, and just hear your thoughts, and then we'll.
Yeah, the Building 6 was a federal treasury building, and it had $1 billion of gold bullion in the basement. And when the firemen went in there before the building was imploded, the vault door was open, and there was tandem axle trucks. It looked like somebody had come in there with a dump truck and a front loader and loaded up all the bullion that was in that building and disappeared with it. And other things that were not mentioned so far is that Building 7 contained all the raw data for the Enron, the .com, and the Soros Oil for Food data that was being processed by the SDNY division office, and that's where they held that original material. And they went, well, now we can't prosecute them because it's all gone. And the Cantor Fitzgerald Group were supposed to be selling bonds that had been issued on September 11th, 1991, and those were called Operation Hammer. That was $330 million of bonds that were issued to the Bush clan to go over and pick out oligarchs in Russia and give them each $1 million as seed money so they could qualify for larger money to buy out all of the state industries in Russia, which is exactly what they did. So that's how they went in and asset stripped And it's interesting that they called it Operation Hammer because they were doing the same thing that Arm& Hammer did along with J.P. Morgan when the Bolsheviks overthrew Russia the first time. So it was just an asset strip, and they just like using the same numerology and terminology in order to plant enough seeds so that people can say it's a conspiracy. Well, I'm sorry. It's obvious that it was a conspiracy.
Thank you. Next up, we have Richard Krushnick. Go ahead, Richard.
It seems like you're saying that this was a sudden event, if I understand you. There was a blast, a one-time event, and I don't recall. I mean, I don't know when in the collapse of the buildings that blast would have happened. A, I'd like to know that. And B, I never heard anything about any evidence of any sudden blast, which would be detectable in all kinds of ways.
Yeah, it was. It was. There was a seismic graph of a 2.1 and a 2.2 Richter scale explosion 12 seconds prior to the video documented collapse of each one of the Twin Towers. So that's what happened, and it was a blast that was in the basement. And like I said, the granite bedrock contained the blast, and it also focused it up through the center of the building. That's the lens portion. And then it also acted as a tamper by delaying the amount of fission and heat so that it wasn't just one giant blast and one giant mushroom cloud, which you can see the mushroom cloud coming out of the top of the building, and it coated Manhattan with 6 inches of dust.
Uh-huh. Now, why wouldn't if it was that large of a blast, I don't understand why it wouldn't have been visible from top to bottom, popping out all of the windows and blowing stuff out the sides.
Well, because the elevators were located in the very center core of the building, and I'll see if I can pull up.
No, I'm very familiar with the structure of the building. Yes.
Right. So for the people that aren't familiar with the building, you had the 50 elevator shafts in the center of the building along with 3 stairway shafts, and then you had office space on all 4 sides around that. And so this is the floor joist framing and the center column framing. And so what happened is the walls around the elevator were all fire-rated walls, and they contained the blast to a certain extent until they started getting vaporized themselves, at which point some of the blast would have come out. It's speculation at this point whether the plasma blast lasted for a couple of seconds or lasted for 15 or 20 seconds. But the building's collapsing in 14 seconds gives you a pretty good idea that they were able to pull out the whole center of the building. And what happens is when you have floor joists that are supported by the center columns, and you blow out all the center columns, then the floors start to fall. And as the floors fall, they'll fall in the center where there's no longer any support, and they're going to pull the section of wall above them. And as the section of the wall above them falls, then you're going to have a triangular section between the floor that's still standing and the floor that just collapsed on it that's going to collapse, and that's going to blow the squibs out of the side of the building that Richard Gage says are proof that they planted thermite charges at every one of those hundreds of columns around the outside of the building. It's absolutely ridiculous. They didn't do that. What happened is the floors were collapsing and pancaking upon themselves, pulling the walls in on top of itself as it came down. It was compressing the air in that floor and then blasting it out the side of the building. And that's why you have those squib lines that are following the fall of the building all the way down. It wasn't a bunch of controlled demolitions that were simultaneously set off in 14 seconds on every floor of the building. That's preposterous.
Thank you.
Well, one last point. I found it very compelling the view of the Twin Tower, one of them, from below the demolition wave, where you could actually see with your own eyes the explosions going off all around the periphery of the building, one floor after another. I don't know if you ever saw that, but to me, that was very compelling evidence that they indeed did have explosives blowing out the exoskeleton sequenced on every floor.
Well, they certainly had charges that were set off prior, and there were people that said that there were explosions prior to the plane impacts. And those explosions were taking out the elevators because they didn't have continuous elevators from top to bottom on every floor. They had transfer floors where you'd go up and then you'd transfer to another elevator. And so that's how you got all the intermediate floors. And so they had a couple of express elevators that went from the first floor all the way up to the world of the windows or whatever it was at the top of the building. And then they had the other normal floors. They had transfer floors, and they had to blow out the tops of those, which were easy enough to do because they had a fake elevator repair company. I think it was called Acme that came in that has some questionable connections under the surveillance of Marvin Bush's surveillance company that was in charge of renovating the elevators, and they probably planted charges. Who knows? They may have sprayed the inside of the elevator shafts with thermite to speed up whatever happened. You know, at this point, with all of the evidence being destroyed, all we've got is the empirical evidence of the evidence that there was a nuclear blast and that you couldn't possibly have done that amount of damage and had melted a hole in the granite underneath the building from a satellite. That's absolutely absurd. You couldn't have done it from a stationary tertiary site from a directed weapon anywhere near the site. And the thing is, you can shoot down through the atmosphere and still have a fairly concentrated directed energy. But it looks like most of the directed energy that they're using now is stuff that's close range to military bases, or it's by C-130s that are flying by at 20,000 foot altitude, and you just don't notice that they're up there. But it's just difficult to transfer that amount of energy because it dissipates in the atmosphere.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have Jack Bottomley. Go ahead, Jack.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, great. Could you repeat the name of the Bush book and the author about Bush and banking?
Yes, it's called The Mafia, the CIA, and George Bush, and it's by Pete Bruton. And if you want to get a primer for this, you can Google Pete Bruton, Mafia, CIA, and George Bush, Austin PBS. He did a 2-hour-long interview detailing all of the connections with the different Bush gangs and the different savings and loans that they ripped off. And like I said, I worked with. Go ahead.
No, I didn't mean to cut you off. I sneezed.
Okay.
Well, it's a very, very good presentation, and I really like it a lot. But I disagree with one thing. I was an officer in the Marines, and coincidentally, I studied explosives.
Okay.
For about 6 months, and
Okay.
how to blow up bridges and things like that.
Yeah.
And in the Marines, well, let me put it this way. Supposing you and I are going into a battle against the Nazis in World War II.
Right.
And we figure out, well, there's about 60% chance we're going to get killed. So
I'm not liking the odds.
Let's rely only on our machine guns.
Yeah.
Or let's only rely on our hand grenades.
Right.
Or let's only rely on our artillery fired from ships 20 miles offshore.
Right.
Let's only rely on the fake tanks and make the Nazis think we're coming into Norway. It was a terminology. You throw everything in, including the kitchen sink, any technology, and that's why Department of Defense has become such a cesspool of developing new, more and more weapons. it's gotten out of control. But getting back to you and I fighting in World War II against the Nazis, we would use every single thing we had and everything we could get. And these people who did 9/11, they'd be ruined if they were caught. So therefore, they would use absolutely everything they could get, and they had no financial limit. They could buy anything and get anything. So I say that it isn't one or the other; it's all of them together. For example, the beams were all cut in. Was it 12 or 14-foot pieces? There was just thousands of these steel beams cut to 12 to 14 feet long, which is very easy to load onto trucks. But that doesn't go along with a great big explosion. It wouldn't cut the beams all at 12 or 14 feet. So when I first got involved with 9/11, there were people who also were involved who were into flat Earth. And one of them came up to me and he said, "Do you believe the Earth is flat or round?" And I said, "Well, I believe it's round. I've been up in military planes high enough you can see the whole curvature of the Earth." And he said, "You stupid motherfucker, gosh damn you," he screamed at me. He was attacking me.
Yeah.
But you don't need to fight about these things, is my point.
Right.
So I believe Richard's right. I believe you're right. I believe Judy Wood is right on something. She shouldn't say it was only directed energy. She should say there was directed energy, just from the evidence of the cabs melted on the bridge nearby. So there was some sort of directed energy thing that they. And also, you've got to understand that these people who in the military is specialized in directed energy or whatever, they're just gleeful to be able to get involved in something like this. So they would have pleaded, please let our technology be involved in this thing too.
Okay. Well, being in the military, you might be interested in a group called Able Danger, who was using a computer program to track keywords worldwide, and they had managed to locate 4 of the claimed hijackers, including Muhammad Atta, and they were disbanded in January of 2001, one of the first things that Bush did when he took office. And then they did not reconvene until they got an emergency notice to meet at the Pentagon at 8 o'clock on September 11th in the same room where they had the $2.3 trillion of missing Pentagon records. And coincidentally, a missile knocked a hole in the building and went all the way through 5 different segments in order to blow up in the room where it killed 39 of the 40 members of the Able Danger group. And the only reason there was one that wasn't there is because he got stuck in traffic and was late. So, I don't know what to tell you other than you can't do all of this. You can't control NORAD if all you got's a dozen box cutters. And you can't make NORAD go have training exercises.
Oh, of course not.
In Alaska and Nebraska in order to not be available in the Northeast corridor on the day you need them. So bottom line is,
of course not. But supposing you were in charge of the military, you'd be in charge of NORAD. You'd be in charge of the missile going into the Pentagon or whoever it was.
Yeah.
You'd be in charge of all those things. So you could arrange it, and you'd have hundreds of people working for you to organize this. That's one thing that people don't understand, is that there are hundreds of people behind the public figure that are working to organize it. And I actually organized parades when I was in the military, and it's a similar thing. You've got to call everybody up. Are you going to be here at this time? You're going to do this,
right.
And
well, I've also attended 3 of the JFK conferences, 4-day long conferences. I went up there to meet Barbara Honecker, who was one of the presenters, and also James Spetzer in 2018. I went back again in 2022 because I was going to be interviewing somebody on TNT Radio about on the JFK. And then I went back again this year because they had some really interesting information about Reinhard Gehlen, who was a classmate of Alan Dulles at Oxford Economic Institute getting a master's degree, and then went to work for Sullivan and Cromwell for 2 years and arranged a $250 million gold loan to Hitler in order to finance some of the financing that went into creating the Third Reich. And he also met regularly with Alan Dulles. He was in charge of the AB War, WEHR, which was the German version of CIA, which was actually above the SS. He was placed in head of the BND, which was the West German CIA after the war, and he was also a NATO officer. So, the thing is, you got to realize we're dealing with a network, a criminal network that's absolutely unimaginable until you start turning over a few pages and you realize, and after going and visiting the stupid sniper's nest on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, I can tell you unequivocally that didn't happen. And Lee Harvey Oswald, there's ample evidence now of what actually happened in JFK's case, and the Warren Commission was a complete fraud, as was the 9/11 Commission. And once people make the breakthrough about our government can lie about absolutely everything and has lied about everything and has spent taxpayer money creating bioweapons that they've infected us with. Once you get to that realization that you're in a different reality, then you understand that all of this stuff is possible, and there's people that have the motives and the methods to do all of these things. And that's all I did and the money. And so that's all I've done is I've taken basic engineering training and applied it to what was available in the way of evidence and tried to make the best case scenario. And, if Judy Woods was willing to say that a plasma bomb in the basement of the building is a directed energy weapon, I'm willing to say, Judy, you're 100% correct, but she won't make that statement. If she's just going with the hypothesis about a satellite, it's ridiculous to think you can take the amount of energy that it took, and she's got the energy calculations for destroying the building. That's more energy than the United States produces in a whole freaking day. You didn't do that with a satellite and then beam it down and hit 4 different buildings. I mean, come on,
they
Judy.
only go about a mile or less.
Yeah, that's it. So, so that's not it. And the same thing with thermite. Sure, thermite, you can see the sections of box girders at the base of the building that are cut at a 45-degree angle. That's not a failure plane for a plate girder box column. Those absolutely were thermite charges. And if you go to the Controlled Demolition CDI group, Sparks, which they're not any longer on YouTube. I don't know if they decided they were teaching their competition how to do their job too well, or if somebody said, hey, this is too valuable of information for people that are actually out destroying buildings. But they show that they use copper angles, and they put the thermite in it, and then they put the magnesium fuse in, and then they use pneumatic triggers because it's too dangerous to try to use electrical wiring. And so that's what they use for the trigger. And you can see the columns that are cut at a 45-degree angle where they slope the building to fall down into its own footprint. So, yeah, there's no question that thermite was used to some degree inside the building. So, Richard, you're correct on that, but you're not correct about it being the motive force.
Yeah, but like the flat Earth people, we can't say that one or the other is. It has to be. We agree that this was used and that was used and the other was used, and it was a false flag.
Thank you, Jack. We have to move on. We're trying to wrap it up so we can get to the agenda tonight before people fall asleep.
God, I hope I didn't put anybody to sleep.
No, it's late here on the East Coast, and we're all kind of tired from shoveling and chipping away at the ice. So next up we have Matthew.
Oh, hi. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I want to share my screen. There's some photos that I want to share. This one right here, this window. Let's see if I can share sound as well. Okay, so I just want to get my head around your hypothesis. So this photo right here is of I believe the South Tower. There's a red-shaped hole, but I want to show this because these are the lobby columns, the exterior lobby columns. They were at ground level before the towers fell. and they're still there, and there's
Right.
nothing on top of them. So there's 110 floors above them, and they're gone,
Right.
and these aren't even pushed outward. So, and I have some more photos of them. Let's click up. There's another photo there. There's also the sphere. Nothing's landed on top. So basically, my question on this period is, so if there's something underneath, like the bomb or the nukes, so why is this not destroyed? And then again, these are the lobby columns. The exterior, which is the bottom, they're
Right.
the ones standing, not the 110 floors above. And yeah, so those are not standing. Then before we get further, I want to show this is building 3. This is right next to the south tower.
Right.
And those are the exterior columns of the lobby.
Right.
Those are standing. This one, almost all of it is gone, but the stub. So the question is, why is this all gone? But yet these are fine, and they're still vertical. So in other words, they weren't laterally pushed in any way. They were not pushed laterally. There's nothing kinetic pushing it outwards. And
Right.
so one more question. Okay, so that's part. You can say that question. Then the other one is, a lot of people talk about the toasted cars. So this is a live footage from, I believe this was MSNBC or an NBC News. The reporter says that he heard that cars 10 blocks away were going on fire. This is before the towers fell. This is right when the first and second impacts. So I'll play this video. It's just 30 seconds, and you guys, and then you can see what your thoughts are on all this.
Across, I'd say a good 10 city blocks, New York City blocks from that North Tower, there's a parking lot which I'm right over. There are cars on fire that evidently got hit by debris, and these cars are just burning untended to the ground. There's one completely engulfed in flames, and mind you, this is quite a distance from this first building, and that those fires began right after the first explosion, and then just got exacerbated by the second one a few minutes later. Across.
Yeah. All right, so that's my stuff there. So up to you. Yeah. So now, what your thoughts are on those?
Okay. Yeah. If you can turn off your screen share, I'll share one of mine.
I'm trying to see if I can go to it. Okay. How do I? Okay. Oh, there it is. Stop sharing. How do I stop sharing? I think I'm stopped sharing. Did I? Oh no, there it is. There. Yeah. I don't use. Okay. I don't use that up.
Okay.
I'll
Yeah. These are splayed columns at the base. What they did is they took those 16 by 16 box columns and joined them in groups of 3 in order to get a wide enough passage to be able to walk into the building. And then the first floor lobby had a 50-foot high ceiling. So the second floor was actually 50 feet above. So you didn't have anything in there to pull those wall sections down. And once the floors started collapsing, it didn't have anything there that would have forced those particular things down. So I'm glad you mentioned that, and that answers that particular question fairly well. As far as
can you repeat that again? Sorry, I just wanted to grasp it again. So you're saying that because there was a lobby, so there's nothing between, nothing's pushing it outwards. But isn't there a giant elevator shaft full of
there's an elevator shaft in the center.
And then,
but then there's nothing.
Is anything being pushed outwards? What's being pushed outwards? Or how does that? Can you, if you can, step by step, like just to simplify it for me? I'm just trying to wrap my head around. It's from the top down or from the sides?
Well, what happened is the building was collapsing inside of its own footprint, but by the time you got down to the lobby, you had a 50-foot high ceiling in the lobby. You can see photos of people walking around inside the lobby. And when that floor collapsed, it didn't have anything to pull the splayed portion of these columns down. And so it had already stripped off. And who knows what they did in the way of pre-planning as far as going in there and cutting out, like I said, moment connections. And you get plasma cutters and you go in there and just cut off all the bolts that you need to, and you cut off the moment connections and the shear walls, and all of that stuff would have been done as part of the pre-planning of the controlled demolition. And that reduces the amount of blast that you have to have, and it also gives you control over the thing falling in its own footprint.
Yeah, but the building right beside it, building 3, that's almost all gone, and that's right beside the column. So like, what is? So we have the columns here. We have the building. Building 3 is all gone, but like a little stub. So something damaged this. Yet these ones are perfectly still, and they're not even. There's no even indication of being ripped off. So like the bolts on top, the bolts were removed. Yeah, if you look at it, it's vertical, but it's the bolts actually removed. It's not actually being ripped off.
Right. I haven't looked at building 3, but this is the thermographic side of the whole thing. And I will pick out the building 3 and I'll see which one of these little footprints it is. And maybe if we do a follow-up session, or maybe if they have an online discussion afterwards, I can come up with an explanation for that, because I really haven't studied anything besides the 1, 2, 6, and 7.
All right. Thanks.
Hey, thank you so much.
No problem. Oh, also, if you can, the ones about the toasted cars, if you can answer that, like.
Yeah, there again, I mentioned that.
Okay.
The steel would work as a waveguide, and so if you've got plasma coming out uniformly across the floor, when it hits that, it's going to form a pattern, and that pattern will block out and give you an absolute cut line on where you're doing the burn on the vehicles, and that's why you have burns where the front of the vehicle will have a complete line, and it's not, the paint's not even blistered on the back of the building.
No, I was just saying it was before the buildings fell. It was minutes after the impact. So like, were you saying there's nukes even at the impacts, or what's causing those? Because it was the impacts and the cars were toasted.
Can I interject something related to this?
Yes, go ahead.
1 second. I knew someone who was in the subway on September 11th who was stuck there before the buildings came down, right before. In fact, they saw the buildings come down when they were evacuated to the street, and they basically witnessed explosions in the subway. Like the subway was full of smoke, and there was something going on, explosives in the subway before either of the buildings. That's why I'm here, basically. That's what got me interested in being in the 9/11 movement.
And also you had a van full of explosives that was captured inside the Holland Tunnel before they were able to set it off. And you also had people that were trying to set charges at the bridge anchors for the Washington Bridge. And those two teams were demolition teams that were arrested and were released by Giuliani, along with
I mean, that's the only thing I wanted to just interject there. Just because it's interesting. Your presentation was good. Thank you. It was interesting.
Okay. Well, that's what we need to do. We need to have an open discussion about this, and this is certainly a whole set of facts that needs to be discussed. And I think that the facts, I tried to put them together in as coherent a form as possible, extemporaneously. If we were doing a documentary film and we were coming back and editing all this stuff and putting every word and putting all the screen shares, then yeah, we can do a more professional job. But this is just to get the material out there, because there's such a block. If I put this on YouTube, it would absolutely get killed. So there's limited number of places where this kind of material can be discussed. Odyssey and Rumble and BitChute are the only ones I'm aware of, maybe Telegram, where you could put this kind of material up. And who knows, maybe you can put this up at X at this point, and maybe Elon will say this is okay to discuss at this point, because this is what needs to be discussed. This got us into the war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq. And both of those were extremely costly. $2 to $3 trillion in Afghanistan, and we killed 500,000 people. $1 trillion in Iraq, and we killed another 1 million people. And then that set the stage for the CIA Operation Zero Footprint, where we overthrew the governments in Tunisia, Yemen, Egypt, and Libya. And then we took the Libyan weapons and overthrew the government in Syria. So, if you want to know what the United States government's up to, there's a great website called Tales of the American Empire, which is really good, has 120 documentary series with a lot of archival footage and plenty of references on the stuff we've done. Or you can look up Wiki on color revolutions. And we've overthrown the governments in 100 countries in the last 100 years. We do it on a regular basis. We overthrew a dozen countries in Eastern Europe since 2002. We overthrew the government in Ukraine in 2004 in the Orange Revolution, and then again in 2014 in the Maidan Revolution. So bottom line is there's a war industry that profits by having war. And, we're living in the Orwellian reality of Oceania has always / never been at war with East Asia / Eurasia. It's like we live in this Orwellian world where you got Newthink, where you're not allowed to, and Newspeak, and you're not allowed to discuss these things. And that's why I really treasure the fact that you've let me make this presentation today. And I hope we can make this go viral, because this is the kind of debate that we need to have on a national level. And given the preponderance of the evidence, which is what you would do in a criminal case, we have that. If you're doing a civil case, beyond a reasonable doubt is in a criminal case, and I think we presented beyond a reasonable doubt. But preponderance of the evidence is all that's necessary in a civil case, and we certainly provided that. So bottom line is, we've tried, and I've tried to be an honest broker. And like I said, I've spent thousands and thousands of hours since 911, so 24 years of research in this at a college professor's level to try to understand it, as well as doing the history research on enormous amounts of stuff about World War II. And I've written over 200 articles. I've got 60 at Canada Free Press. I've been 60 at Principia Scientific. I've been cross-linked at Drudge Report, Breitbart, InfoWars, Climate Depot, on and on and on. So now any further questions? I think it's taco time in Texas. I'm going to go have dinner.
We do have two more questions. I did want to quickly comment. We've had pretty good luck with Rumble. Rumble
Okay, good.
Seem to censor anything as far as I know, knock on wood. And you're absolutely right. The war on terror is basically license for endless wars. Yeah, but anyway, Chris Bergier is up next, but he's already asked a question. Chris, I hope you don't.
Yeah, let Keith ask a question first.
Joe, I got a question about the you mentioned nuclear bunker buster bombs, right?
Right.
What's the model number of those, and what's the kiloton rating?
They're pretty low kiloton because there again, it's a plasma, and that was in an article, several articles that were at Veterans Today. And what we developed was the mother of all bombs, and this was like a 20,000-pound bomb that could only be delivered by a B-52, and we'd only produced a couple of those. And Trump ended up dumping one of those on some caves in Afghanistan just because it was reaching its life limit as far as stability of the explosives. And so that was just to get rid of one of them and to show how tough we were.
Are you saying that the mother of all bombs in Afghanistan was similar yield weight? Is that what you're saying?
No. It was a 20,000-pound, but it could only bust a bunker down to about 1,500 feet. When they developed the plasma bunker buster bombs, and there again, this was in one of the later articles at Veterans Today. And when they originally posted the Palmer report in 2019, they had an 80-article bibliography of articles that had been written on nuclear education.
I'm looking for a number. What's the spherical diameter of the explosion damage signature from a bunker buster?
There again, I think it's about 24 to 36 inches in diameter, and it comes down as a bomb, and it's like parachuted down. And
what's its explosion signature? What's the damage signature? Not its physical size. What's the damage signature when it blows up?
Well, there again, it's not a detonation. It's a plasma. What you're doing is you're converting the nuclear energy into a plasma ray that's burning a hole, and it can burn through 5,000 feet of granite.
Yes, but that has to be physically focused. And if it's a bomb, it's not physically focused.
I'm on low power mode, so I'm going to have to switch off.
In other words, you can't answer and won't answer. You're afraid to answer.
No, it's
Why
not,
do we
I
need
can't
to fight
answer
like
both,
this?
Chris.
Because if the size of the bomb
shut off on me because I've used all my battery power. I can maybe do this as audio only. Let's see if I can. And now my speaker's off.
Why fight like this?
Yeah. So we still can hear you, Joseph.
Okay. Well then. Okay. Well now I plugged in my alternate power source, but now I'm not using my mic and earphones.
Well, we can still hear you just fine. Do you want to take one last question?
Sure.
All right. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hello. This is Chris. This is Chris Bergier again. I just thought I'd show you this clip right here. Share. Hold on, and then I'm going to play it. So this is what a half ton of TNT does to an 8-ton whale. Is everybody watching?
Sure.
Okay. So just keep on watching the screen. So that's what a half That's a kinetic reaction of what a half ton of TNT does to an 8-ton whale. So if the towers have 200,000 tons of steel, I mean, what wouldn't it be very noticeable if the steel was, had a kinetic reaction on it? I mean, I think all half of all Lower Manhattan would have been just obliterated. And then also, I believe there were two types of directed energy weapons. There were some that were placed in the building, and then whatever didn't take out the inside of the building. There were satellite directed energy weapons, and 107, who's very smart, very connected with the upper echelon of the military, says we have technology where satellites can shoot down interfering microwaves and dustify objects on the ground. But this technology is extremely classified. So, I mean, if you care to comment, I'd appreciate, because it, finding the truth on 9/11 scientifically is very important for everyone. So,
yes, it is. And using the metric system, a mega is 10 to the 6th magnitude. So that's 1,000,000 times greater. So when you're talking a megaton bomb, that's a megaton of TNT, and that's what you get with 1 ton of reactant. So you got 1 ton of plutonium or uranium to make the bomb with, then you get 1,000,000 times increase. And there again, if you turn it into a fission fusion bomb using the Teller-Ulam, then you'll end up getting another magnitude or 2 increase over that. And as far as the question that got earlier about the bunker buster bomb, I'm sorry, I didn't memorize absolutely everything in the 80 articles at Veterans Today, but if you put this up at Rumble, I will find the articles, and there's probably several of them at Veterans Today, that have the information about the bunker buster bomb as far as the exact thing. But here's what happens with a bunker buster bomb. You drop it down and it burns a hole straight down in the granite, 5,000 feet of granite. But if it hits a conduit or a corridor or a pipe or a vent or anything, it's going to send a hot plasma blast down that corridor, and that will burn out any equipment. It'll suck out all the oxygen. It will, it's just like the hyperbaric bombs that they're using now, where they come in and blow fuel air and then they ignite it. And when the fuel air goes off, it sucks all the oxygen out of the air. And if you're inside a cave or a tunnel, it pulls your lungs up out of your throat to get the air that's in your lungs. That's how it creates a vacuum, and it just sucks everything out of you. So bottom line is hyperbaric. Okay, whatever. Thermobaric. Okay, there we go. Yeah, I've been too many times scuba diving, and I was worried about spending time in a hypobaric chamber. Okay, thermobaric. Okay, but anyhow, thank you so much.
This recording is going to be a little disjointed because of noticing the chat. So I just want to explain that for people watching the video later. Some of these seemingly unrelated comments are responding to the chats. Just for a little explanation. But thank you, Joseph. This was packed with information for us to all digest, and we're going to move on shortly to our agenda section. People are welcome to stay on, but I will be stopping recording. And I just wanted to make one last comment that Jean La Rotunda asked me to make, and I think it's quite a good one. I think we can all at least agree that WTC 1 and 2 did not collapse from asymmetrical damage and ensuing fires, and that we were lied to. And that we can all just want to see 9/11 transparency. We don't have to agree on how it was done or even who did it. But I think we all pretty much have an idea on that one. But, we're all in this together, and I so much appreciate everyone's time and participation in this incredible event. Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.